everybody, Ben Woodruff here, and in this episode we're going to be talking about a subject I'm very passionate about, and that is teepees. Now teepees are beautiful and they're very practical, and they have a very rich and history that is quite a bit different than a lot of people fully understand. Now I own a couple teepees, and I have really owned a teepee or two for most of my life, ever since I was about 16, 17 years old. And as soon as I got a vehicle, my buddy and I got his little Mazda hatchback, went up to the mountains, harvested a bunch of lodge poles, and we had inherited a teepee, and that was my start. But teepees, over the years, the photos that you get when you're out camping are incredible. Both in the daytime and the night, the light illuminating through the teepee is pure magic. And camping or staying or even living long term in a teepee is also incredibly magical. The teepee that I have now is very large, and I keep it set up in my backyard all fall, winter, and early spring. Usually I take it down for the summer because in the summer it's just too hot to be in there. It traps heat. Everything about a teepee is good for trapping heat. And if you look at the records of early artists that went out on the Great Plains and interacted with some of those tribes that utilized teepees, in the summer they would open up the side and let the air flow through in the daytime and then close it off at night because it was just too hot. But what is a teepee really? And the real reason, first I gotta say why I'm so passionate about teepees is not only because of the Native American history surrounding them, but because my ancestors also lived in teepees. My ancestors, I come from the Sami people. If you haven't heard of us, it's what Santa and his elves and the flying reindeer are all based off of. We come from the area called Lapland, which is part of Norway, part of Sweden, part of Finland, and a little bit of Russia. And the Laplanders, or Lappies as people call us in a derogatory way, we live in teepees called levus. And these levus are almost identical to regular Native American teepees. The door is a little bit different, but other than that, it's pretty much the same thing. Another difference is traditionally we would take forked branches and hook 4 forked branches to the top and then put all the other poles around. Not anymore. Nowadays, Sami people will tie them just like Native Americans do. But a Native American teepee, you start with 4 poles, 3 poles or 4 poles, depending on your tribe. Tie those together and then put all the rest around. And we'll get to that in a minute. We're going to demonstrate how that actually works. But the Sami people were reindeer hunters. They followed the reindeer herds, and because there was a nomadic lifestyle, if your food's always moving, your house has to be portable. And the most economic way and shape to have is something that is conical. And you compare that, if you had a square shaped something or other, that'd be pretty tricky. We have a somewhat similar thing with yurts, where in Mongolia people will live in yurts, and it's circular, but conical is the least amount of material. If you're traveling to haul your material with you, having a conical shape is very strong and sturdy in the winds. It traps in heat, but it's also very portable. So my ancestors used reindeer. We domesticated some of the reindeer, and the reindeer would pull the poles for us to our next encampment, where we'd watch over the rest of the herd. Well, Native American tribes who utilized a teepee were hunting buffalo herds. And being always on the move, you would hunt and you would follow the buffalo. Now, the teepees were also made out of buffalo skin. And same thing. The early Sami levus were made out of reindeer skin. So it's a very similar comparison. And I've always been fascinated by my own heritage and how it compares so closely to such very different people. So a similar way of life has cultivated a similar style of structure of housing for 2 very radically different people. And I always found that fascinating. So the teepees of today are very different. If you see teepees today, almost always teepees are made out of canvas, really high quality, fire retardant canvas, and it's a lot lighter weight. The good and the bad is it's lighter weight. The bad is that it doesn't trap heat in as well. But it doesn't matter, teepees trap in heat so wonderfully. They're absolutely incredible. But the teepees of today are much larger than the teepees of the past. And the reason is, originally, the tribes that utilized teepees, their only draft animal was a dog. And they would make packs that we call a travois. and the dogs would pull along these little packs, and you could have your teepee wrapped up in it, you could have some poles, and the dogs were the draft animal. You were carrying what you could carry on your own, or else what the dogs could haul. So the teepees were much smaller, much like a very large tent by today's standards. But as soon as Native Americans got the horse, they quickly mastered horsemanship and utilized that power. Now they still used travois, but instead of dogs hauling it, now you had horses hauling it. You could have horses haul really large teepees. That being said, the teepees still, of the Plains tribes when they utilize horses, the teepees of today are still generally larger because we can afford to. And the reason is, instead of horses, nowadays we can use a truck. You can use a truck or a trailer to haul those teepee poles that are so long and so heavy, and so you can get away with it. That's what I do. I have a trailer. I also have a rack on my truck that I usually use and put those teepee poles on top, those lodge poles. And it makes things a lot easier. But let's talk about what a teepee actually is. And we're talking about Native American teepees. I'm not going into depth on the teepees of my ancestors here because this is about Native American teepees. So first of all, a Native American teepee is not perfectly round. If you look at it from above, it's kind of a stretched out oval, but it's still in a spiral shape. Now, in order to put up a teepee, there is a specific order. And again, most tribes start with 3 lodge poles. So you tie the 3 poles together, and then you put those 3 up, and there is a very specific order. It's so specific, it even depends on the size. The number, the bigger the teepee, you're going to put them in a different order. I actually have a little card that I keep track of. I always keep it in my wallet because I forget every time the order. So I have my little card so I can remember every time I set up or take down my teepee to make sure I get it right. Now, when you set up the teepee, when you start to put the poles in, as you go along, you are wrapping around the poles and stabilizing them, tightening them as you go. Now, once the entire teepee is set up, once the lodge poles are all set up, then you're going to put the skin, the canvas on, the cover skin. You wrap that around and you stitch up the front with, usually we use little pieces of willow that are cut on either end, and it's called stitching, and you stitch up the front and you cover it up. Now, the door of a teepee traditionally is round and actually quite small. So you kind of have to step into it and kind of duck into it. And that's, of course, in the frigid winters, you don't want a big, huge door with tons of all that hot air going in and out. You don't want that. So a smaller door makes sense in that way. But when you're putting this skin on, you make sure that it doesn't go all the way down to the ground level. You would think that you wanted the teepee to go all the way down to the ground level, right? So that you wouldn't get a draft coming in. But actually, around the inside of the teepee, you put what's called a liner. Now the liner goes down to the ground and then goes in towards the center of the teepee. And that does go down to the ground. So you have a 6-inch gap to an 8-inch gap all around the outside of the skin. There's a very good reason for this. And boy, I wish we didn't have to do this. This is the worst part of setting about a teepee. You think about how heavy these things are and how much work it takes to set up a big teepee. It's a lot of work. It's a pain. But you know what? The worst part is setting up the liner, because you have to tie a rope all around every single pole around the bottom of the teepee, and then also about chest height all around every pole of the teepee, and then you have to go through and tie the liner all along the way. And it is backbreaking and is frustrating, but it is vital to a teepee properly functioning, because what happens is you have made a way to keep the teepee burning bright without having to worry about asphyxiation or about running out of oxygen. Fires are combustion. Fires require fuel to burn of some kind, wood, buffalo chips, even natural gases if you have like a propane fire. But they also require oxygen as part of the combustion process. That means you're in this little cone. You can run out of oxygen. You can kill yourself, literally. And so where does that oxygen come from? Well, the beauty is that having this liner around the inside and having a gap around the outside, it allows air to get sucked in up through the liner and then go straight down to the fire, and then the heat and any smoke goes out the top of the teepee. This is a brilliant, simple design. I love to show people just when it's set right and you got everything just how it should be, is I'll light a match and blow it out and hold it up in the teepee, and the smoke, that little smoke from the match, will go down to the fire because it's sucking in oxygen and pulling it into the fire. It's really pretty amazing. So the nice thing about a teepee is with very little fire, it is incredibly warm. Again, so hot that I don't use them in the summer. It's just too incredibly hot. It's my happy place to go to in the winter is I deck out my teepee and have it super nice, and just have, I put full couches and furs everywhere, and just, I usually do like a propane fire just so it's easy and convenient. And in the dead of winter when it's ice cold, especially if it's in the teens or down below zero, you go out in the teepee, go out barefoot in a pair of shorts, and it's nice and warm and cozy, and it's so illuminating and beautiful. Now in the daytime, light is coming in from the teepee, from the outside. The sunlight breaks through and it's very white looking. But then as time fades into night, the whole scene changes, and suddenly you have these warm earth tones and these orange and yellow hues bouncing back at you that are very rejuvenating to the soul in a very literal way. And we live in a world of rectangles everywhere we go. The edges of a car, the edges of a road, the edges of a building, the edges of your house, everything's like square right angles. That does something to your mind. In a teepee, it's almost like being in a womb. It's circular, and when the doors are closed and everything is done, it's a circle that goes on forever. There's no start or end, and you just feel safe. And it's a humbling experience. It really is a beautiful experience, and it's really wonderful. So teepees, again, the big strength of a teepee is that they were highly portable, but still very stable under many conditions, both the summer and the winter. They can hold their own. Under very strong winds, they can still hold their own. And so they've been used by many different tribes, but the interesting thing is most tribes did not use teepees. Now, when you talk about Native Americans and you talk about where do they live, most people all over the world, a teepee is the first thing that pops into their head. That's just been associated, I think, largely because of the old Western movies of the early 1900s, where they always depicted Native Americans as living in teepees. So that was kind of just the holotype for where they lived. But very few tribes did. This is specifically for nomadic hunters who are hunting herds that move. Mostly those who hunted buffalo herds. Could be also tribes that are hunting elk and different things. But Native Americans all around Canada and the United States came up with a myriad of different ideas from housing, from adobe pueblos that were entirely permanent to pit houses that were half above ground to half below ground, to long houses. A lot of the eastern tribes had these big old long houses made with like cedar planks and things like that. All different ideas, Everything you can conceive of for a type of housing Native Americans came up with. But the teepee is arguably the most iconic. It's certainly one of the most beautiful types of dwellings that any people of any time and anywhere in the world have ever lived in. And again, it is something that is just so cut and dry, so direct, and so easy, but it gives you the ability to be portable and to follow your food supply. So I hope that you enjoyed this video, learning a little bit more about what teepees are and how they work. Let me know in the comments what experiences you've had with teepees, and if you haven't already, if you could hit subscribe, I very much appreciate it. But as always, please always remember that life is a gift. So never stop learning and never stop exploring. We'll see you next time.